Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George, and today we're asking, do we care more about a brand or what they stand for? Hello, thank you so much for downloading this week's episode. This week we're talking all about brand, and I can't do it on my own, obviously, so I have my wonderful co-host, Lizzie Elston. How are you, Lizzie?
Hey, George. I'm very well indeed, thank you. Very much looking forward to this episode and talking about brand. Coincidentally, I've been playing a game with my son and my nephew recently called the Logo Game, and it's been a good thought provoker about some of the brands that are out there. And I mean, clearly, apparently brands are not just about logos, but it's been a good way to start thinking about the importance of how we feel when we see and hear and buy from particular brands.
That sounds fantastic. Yes, that's definitely on my Christmas list. So who do we have in the virtual green room with us this week to talk us through this?
So delighted to welcome to the green room Annabel Rake. Annabel is Chief Marketing Officer for Deloitte and leads our brand and marketing strategy across the UK and North and South Europe. Morning, Annabel.
Good morning, Lizzie, and good morning, George.
Welcome. And we're also joined by Johan Bello. Johan is co-founder and executive creative director at ACNE. ACNE is a Deloitte business and international creative agency working for brands such as IKEA, Polestar and Instagram. Welcome, Johan.
Hi, thank you. And hello to everyone.
And I think even though we're all virtual in our rooms and bedrooms and all sorts, we've got an icebreaker, have we, Lizzie?
And here it is. Oh, this is a good one. What's your favourite TV show?
Happy to kick off. My favourite TV show ever that I recommend to lots of people if they haven't seen it is The West Wing. I think it's an amazing show. I think at its time was pioneering in the way that it shot scenes, etc. And I've just seen that they have a special reunion episode, which I'm trying to figure out how I can watch, being based in the UK.
Great choice. Johan, what about you?
Yeah, so I have to mention two shows that I've really kind of been really obsessed with. So Seinfeld has been one of them that I've kind of started to watch since I was almost 3 years old and up until now. And it's just amazing how many interesting things and how relevant that show is still today. And then I would say Succession has also been, like, from many perspectives, a great show that I've been, watching numerous of times, and also again, like, really interesting how it's built up and so on.
These are all great tips for when we have to lock down again shortly, I'm sure. So this is excellent.
More binge watching.
I think I could go for a bit of a pretentious answer and say something like Andrew Marr or Question Time, but the reality is quite different. So when Peppa Pig's not on the TV, I'd probably go for something like The American Office, or I've got into Schitt's Creek, actually. I've never seen that before, but I think it won a load of Emmys, and then started watching that as well. So it's quite easy watching on an evening.
These are all so good. So I suppose a couple I'd mention. One is that my son and I have got quite into the Mallory Towers series. So I loved the books growing up.
I love the books too, Lizzie.
And I have absolutely loved watching the TV production. So he and I, it's our guilty pleasure. We sit down and we devour them.
This is excellent.
But other than that, I'd say probably The Crown, and I cannot wait for the next series.
Brilliant. Well, Annabel, Johan, thanks so much for that. That's great. But I think we've got to talk about this week's big question. And as I said, we're talking about brand and whether it's about the brand or what the brand stands for. That's the main theme of this week. But perhaps if we just go back right to basics and ask what might sound as a bit of a simplistic question, but perhaps Johan, you may be in a good spot to answer this. But could you talk to us? What is a brand?
Sure. I mean, I have a very personal view on what a brand is. I think if you would ask different people in marketing or outside, you would probably get many different answers. But I think for myself and how I work with brands, I think it's really important, that just because you have a name and a company, it doesn't mean that you have a brand. So to me, it's like if you have a strong brand, you probably have a couple of different values attached to that. So those values are basically what builds your brand.
Annabel, could I ask you the same question? What do you think a brand is? And maybe, yes, to Johan's point, what makes a strong, great brand?
I think a brand is something that actually resides with the consumers of that brand. It's the impression that those consumers, stakeholders have of a particular brand. And I think, obviously being CMO for Deloitte, working in professional services, particularly in our industry, that the brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And of course, you can build that brand, you can drive the story of that brand out into the marketplace, but ultimately it's how your customers, your stakeholders experience you, I think.
And people get quite passionate, don't they, about brands. I think some even go so far as getting tattoos. I know George and I have both got Deloitte tattoos, haven't we?
I was going to say, I'm sure that you have.
I can't show you.
Yeah, no, they're well and truly hidden.
Let me know when you need an ACNE tattoo.
I will do that. But okay, so we might not have quite gone that far, but could you share with us some examples of great brands and why they stand out?
I would love to share my favourite brand, if that's okay, which is Lego. I love Lego.
Yes.
I've always loved it ever since I was a kid. I think that for me, Lego is a really great example of a brand that is true to its roots, true to its history, but also that is moving with where the world is today. And the kind of buildings of the brand in terms of it's about children. Children are role models for Lego and the brand and the organization. And I love this feeling that they have around inspiring the builders of tomorrow. That for me is a really compelling feeling. And having kids now as well, people quite often laugh when I say that I buy my own Lego kits, especially at Christmas. I have a Lego kit every year for Christmas, which is for me, by the way, not for my children. But now I can share that brand love with my kids. And, I think the values that Lego have, especially as a marketer, thinking about creativity, thinking about building, thinking about inspiration, all of these things really resonate with me as a marketer and hopeful brand builder myself. But yeah, sharing that with my children, thinking about how we can spark their curiosity, thinking about how they build things and how they go about doing that. I'm just fascinated every time I play with initially Duplo, but now definitely getting into Lego with them. And they have extended their brand really well, I think, into things like their shops, for example, where the brand experience, I think, is phenomenal. People queue outside Lego shops to go in and experience that. You can buy Lego kits almost anywhere, but people queue outside of that shop to go in and experience that brand for themselves, which I think is amazing. Thinking about this podcast and our focus on what brands stand for and their broader purpose and impact on society. Again, I think that's something that for me, Lego have done really well. But stay true to themselves, by which I mean, they are doing a lot of work around sustainability, and they invest a lot in that, and they invest a lot in their sort of broader purpose around helping children play, and telling that story and getting that out there, which I think is a really important aspect. But they've listened to children as they've decided what to focus on. Children wrote to them saying, please stop using single-use plastics in your product, and they are responding to that, right? So again, it's always going back to the roots of who really matters here, and for Lego it's children and inspiring that future.
What about you, Johan? Any great brands that stand out for you and why that would be?
Yeah, I would say I have two brands that I have in mind. Actually, one of them actually relating to what Annabel was mentioning. So the first one would be on a professional level. I think, again, here, IKEA is something that I've been heavily involved in for many, from very different aspects. And I just really love how their mindset is when it comes to making products and innovation, and how they actually use their products for solving like real problems out there in people's homes. And I remember when I spoke to one of the people in the product development, I think it was about a vase that you could have like flowers and stuff with. And we were discussing how beautiful that vase could be. But then he also added but you know what, maybe that vase could be a lamp as well. So it's like a vase and a lamp. And I really like that mindset of like really being unexpected when it comes to products. And more of a personal brand for me, it's Nike, because even if I don't work out every day, I feel Nike is kind of an extension of myself. Just how they have set up the way to interact with that brand. You know, when I open the app, there's a motivator telling me to, you know, 30 minutes is enough to go for a run. And they have done a really, really good job, like helping me as a consumer to really get on with my different athletics. So I think that's more on a personal level. And of course, there are tons of other brands that interact with me every day, but those two are the most important.
And I think it's interesting because not only do we know a bit more about your Christmas wish list this year, but also, you know, you chose brands which I think, as Annabel said earlier, that they get the consumer and their brands, you know, in the eyes of the consumer, really, which is really important. And you also mentioned how this sort of buzzword, which has been a bit of a phenomenon for the last couple of years, corporate purpose, and purpose is what these organizations are standing for. But how important is it for a brand to stand for something, Annabel, perhaps?
I think it's incredibly important, and arguably, given the situation that we are all unfortunately in at the moment with the global pandemic, I think more important than ever, actually. And there's actually tons of research now that shows that people are responding with their actions to what brands are doing in response to the pandemic, by which I mean, you know, how they treat their customers, how they treat their people. Even recently, we've just launched our Better Banking survey, and that showed that of consumers that have switched banking brands as a result of COVID-19, that over a third of those, their primary reason for doing so was because they were switching to a bank that had a better way of responding to COVID-19 as a pandemic, in a way that they had treated their people and their staff and the communities that they work within. And so I think it was already important in my mind, but I think now more so than ever.
That's right. I think, and in another Deloitte report, which came out recently, the Global Marketing Trends report, I think it said 58% of consumers could name a brand that quickly pivoted in response to the COVID pandemic. And I think, you know, it seems to be that agility and adaptability are really important attributes in order for brands to get that recognition, I suppose, with their consumers. Would you agree, Johan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And in general, I would say that, you know, regardless of what happens in the world, or being in a pandemic or not, I think it's important that if a brand wants to be successful in the end, they need to put more effort into that brand to really stand out. Because looking at, you know, markets today, there are a lot of competitors in most markets, and the ones that actually become successful is those who kind of try to at least connect with the audience and have a purpose for why they exist. So I think that's kind of what we were looking for, like brands with a purpose that actually means something. And I mean, looking at how less time we all have today, we don't have time to spend with brands. That doesn't really mean anything. We want to spend them with those that actually, builds ourselves in a way.
So corporate purpose is really front and center of a lot of brands' communications. But, you know, how important is it for brands to stand for something, and how do you avoid it just sounding like hollow words?
For me, there's a question here, isn't there, around whether a purpose can be created for a brand, or whether it needs to be something that actually is its reason for being already. At its heart, I think a purpose for an organisation is why the people in that organisation kind of get out of bed every day and come to work and do what they do, right? And can that be created? I suppose, George, your question was sort of rooted in, you know, the marketing of that, and, you know, whether that's the right thing to do, therefore. But even just looking at Deloitte, so we have done quite a lot of work on our purpose, and a number of years ago, we, in fact, had a global piece of work looking at what our purpose should be. And I think it became really clear in that It wasn't something that we were creating. It was something that we were understanding, that is inherent in our business, and is why our 300,000 people more than around the world want to get up every morning and work with our clients, with our people, with the communities that we are based in. And our purpose, I think, is pretty simple, around wanting to make an impact that matters for our people, for our clients, for society. And I think that's something that is true and inherent, that we've found wording for, rather than something that we created from scratch, if you see what I mean. I think people are looking for what that full rounded picture is of the brands that they want to experience, consume, wear, eat, drink, whatever it might be, companies that they want to work with. It's an extension of themselves in some way. You put on a piece of branded clothing, or you decide to place a contract worth quite a lot of money with a particular professional services organisation, say, that says something about you. And therefore, I think people want to connect with and understand the breadth of impact that those brands are making, not just in terms of the product or service that they consume, but how those brands work with their suppliers, how they treat their people, how they work with the communities in which they are based. All of that becomes very important as an extension of yourself and your personal brand.
I mean, something that I thought of a lot is let's go back to purpose as a word. To me, it's why do that company or brand even exist? I guess that's what all companies are constantly asking themselves. And I think the ones that are actually successful here are the ones that goes back to the purpose, looking at, where are we today? And time are changing, things are changing, the world is changing. The best purpose I've seen in brands and companies is actually when it's slightly moves on and changes and becomes something different. So maybe you started out with doing a piece of clothing, but you ended up doing something else actually years later. And I think in that sense, the purpose for being a brand in the world is kind of changing all the time. Even if you have your kind of the ground setup of what you're trying to do, it's just purpose is much vaguer today than it was before, maybe.
And there's more accountability, I suppose, now, isn't there? Because of social media, and the consumers have a say in the direction of a company and the direction of a brand and a brand's evolution, which has probably never really happened before. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it has completely changed the conversation. The speed at which it happens as well is just exponential from where we were. So for me, it has changed the game, really. And to go back to some earlier comments around what I was saying, that brands are in the hands and in the minds of those that consume them. Perhaps another of my favourite brands is Yorkshire Tea, probably the brand that I would find it most difficult to live without, and I cannot take it when I get an alternative come back from the shops when I've clearly put Yorkshire Tea on my shopping list. But
do you take Yorkshire tea bags with you on holiday?
You have to. You absolutely
just
have
in case.
Exactly. But for me, the product is perfect, right? But as well as COVID that we're experiencing at the moment, over the summer, obviously with the killing of George Floyd and the huge focus on the Black Lives Matter movement, rightfully so, brands came under a lot of scrutiny in terms of their response to that. And just with Yorkshire Tea, there was a conversation that was going on Twitter with somebody, a Yorkshire vlogger, I think, that had said, I'm glad Yorkshire Tea haven't kind of got involved in this. And actually, they came straight back saying, we are against racism, and, very happy for consumers who are not with us on that, not to buy Yorkshire Tea. And I think a few other tea brands got involved fairly rapidly with the hashtag solidarity, which again, this kind of conversation that happens online now and between brands. It's not just brands and consumers that are having the conversation and the experience. It's brands that are interacting with each other as well. So for me, social has completely changed the game.
So talking about sort of working with consumers and them being very much part of the story. Stories is such a big thing we talk about now. And I think it was Steve Jobs that said that the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. Why is it that telling stories for brands is so important?
Yeah, I mean, to me, storytelling is a way for a brand to express everything they stand for by using a narrative or storytelling as a tool. I think you could be so much more emotional and actually connect with the customers, and sometimes that's the only way to connect to customers, by using storytelling in best way possible. And sometimes storytelling could be through a film, or sometimes it could be through a post, or something in between. And I think that's the beauty of storytelling. It doesn't say exactly how we do it. It's just a great tool to use to reach customers.
Yeah, I think the really important word there was around the emotion that stories bring out, and that emotional connection. I think that brands want to have with consumers. Stories do have a narrative, as Johan said. They often have tragedy or humor. They often have heroes and heroines, or anti-heroes and anti-heroines, or there's somebody to root for in it. And I think that connection that you get, that emotional connection to a brand, therefore is strengthened. The story doesn't always have to feature the brand as the hero or heroine, right? To give a Deloitte example, we have done an awful lot of work over the last few years to impact 1 million futures, the people that are in the communities that we work in. And we reached our 1 million futures goal, and we were super proud of that as an organisation, and we absolutely should be proud of that. But we didn't want to tell that story by saying, look, we've impacted 1 million future, isn't that great? It is in itself, but actually it's the individuals that we've impacted and the stories that we have told around those individuals. So we've made those people the heroes and the heroines of our storytelling around that, rather than Deloitte. And I think the films that we've created and the way that we've communicated that, I think is very, very powerful as a result, in a way that wouldn't have been if we'd just said we've impacted 1 million people.
We're talking about the importance of storytelling here. And Johan, you work with loads of really, really interesting brands. Could you perhaps talk to us about how you would tell a story for them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the past, I've been working with so many different types of brands, but I would say the one that really sits close to my heart is a campaign I did a while ago for IKEA, and it's called IKEA's Response to Balenciaga. And basically what happened here was that we were kind of finding something interesting in their IKEA's blue bag, the iconic blue bag that they have in all stores. So basically what happened was Balenciaga released a bag, a leather bag that was blue and very similar to IKEA's bag. And the similarities were spot on. So what we said, hey, actually, I called up the client in the morning and said, this thing that's happened, they launched this bag. We need to respond to this. And they were excited. And what I said was like, okay, you know what? You're gonna get all the ideas in 2 hours, without knowing actually if someone was in the office, because this was in the morning. So came into the office, took everyone that I saw, and we sat down in the room. 2 hours later, we sent all those ideas to IKEA, and then together we picked out the best idea. And that was basically just one post that we posted for IKEA, and it became their most impactful marketing campaign ever. And it was just because we were relevant. People were kind of thinking that we were kind of doing something different. We were having fun with, if you're going to buy the bag, buy the original, and we talked about the features of the scrappy IKEA bag in a fun way. So we got basically all the press in the world, everyone talking about it, going into segments that not really were IKEA's primary segments, such, getting into Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and so on. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, thanks for sharing, Johan. I think we'll put that example in the show notes for people to explore further.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? One of my favourites is Luminary Bakery in London. They use baking as a tool to take women on a journey to employability and entrepreneurship, equipping them with transferable skills for the working world. Their letterbox brownies are incredible, and they even have a cookbook. If you fancy a taste, just head to luminarybakery.com or check out the show notes. Now, back to our topic of the day. I guess there's a fine line, isn't there, between getting the story right and perhaps looking at cause marketing, for example, looking at what's topical at the moment and trying to align your brand sort of with what's topical in the market. And it can work incredibly well, I'm sure. Equally, there are examples where there have been massive fails. So, I don't know if that's something that you've got a view on, but how do you ensure you stay topical without almost looking as if you're just trying to join what's the hot topic of the day?
I think you've got to stay true to your own values and your own audience. What do your consumers care about? For us, what do our clients care about? What do the people who want to come and work at Deloitte care about? We know, for example, that both our clients and our people care about the diversity of our firm. It's a topical issue right now, obviously, but something that has been important to us for a period of time. And we know that we need to do some work on that. I think we've been quite open and honest and, authentically true to ourselves as a brand in terms of saying, we recognise this is important. We want to provide diverse teams for our clients. We want to provide a diverse and inclusive place to work for our people. We've got some work to do around that. Here's the journey that we need to go on, and we want our people to support us in that and help us to get there. So I think it's about just, being really true to yourselves as an organisation and the people that you are there to serve or there to work with.
I agree with Annabel. I think, being honest and true to yourself is kind of the essence here. And in a way, and also social again, consumers will spot fake. That is like the biggest truth out there, because, collabs, for example, a really hot topic among brands doing something together, but it's not many brands that do fantastic things. So it kind of fades away when two brands collide and do something just because they want to. If they have a purpose, it was just, you have seen that those are just standing out more. But then I think, from our point of view, social listening and just trying to understand how people are thinking and what they're interested in is a good way to actually understand what is relevant for your brand and what you actually should talk about. So I think it's just a matter of like contributing things to discussions and things happening in the world instead of just trying to fake it.
I just think it's such a positive thing that we've moved in the direction we're moving, and again, to this point of authenticity and to the fact that, yes, we're talking about brand, but brand flows within the company as well as what the external consumer sees. And me personally, working in a firm like Deloitte, where, we walk the talk and we are encouraged to have these conversations that we just wouldn't have been having 5-10 years ago, whether it's about issues relating to your gender, your race, your health, your well-being. I personally find it incredibly refreshing now to be in that sort of environment. And I guess businesses that don't do that do so at their peril, because, at the end of the day, your people are your biggest asset.
And could we perhaps talk a bit more about what happens when brands don't get it quite right? I think it's probably easy to think of the brands which do achieve that authenticity and build the trust with their consumers. But what should brands do when they get it wrong? I know, Annabel, you mentioned that humility is important here.
Yeah, I think you have to hold your hands up, and the leaders of the organisations that don't perhaps get it right, they have to be involved in holding their hands up to that as well, and putting a human face on that. I think as much as we've talked here about people engaging with brands, especially in our marketplace that Deloitte's operating in, our brand is our people. That's generally the experience that our clients will have of Deloitte, is the people that they interact with, and so putting a humble face on that, putting a human face on that, leading, admitting where you have gone wrong, and being really clear about the steps that you're going to take to put things right, and how you're going to hold yourselves accountable to that, and how you want your your stakeholders, your consumers, to hold you accountable for that as well. I think all of those are really important steps for brands to take.
I think something that I thought about regarding this topic is, I mean, to me, it's important, at least when I work with a brand, that the brand has kind of built-in failure into the system. To me, it's like, it's okay to fail. And going back to IKEA, I think they have really succeeded at. It's almost like they have it. I think they actually have it written down in one of their values. Sometimes we fail. Just go up that Monday and start again. It's okay. And I think that's when it comes to marketing. I think it's really important that you have that mindset, because the bigger risk is that you do something that doesn't stand out. And to me, that's an even bigger failure, because you haven't managed to do something unexpected or actually tested something new and whatsoever. So I think failure to me needs to be built into all successful brands, and it's okay.
What about the idea of longevity and standing the test of time? Because you can have brands which are doing everything right that we've talked about, that have got their purpose, that are engaging with consumers, for telling stories, but brands do come and go. Annabel, Deloitte's been around for 175 years. What do you think makes a brand stand the test of time?
Relevance. I think it's being relevant to your stakeholder set, whoever they may be. And yes, Deloitte has been around for 175 years as we record this. And I think where we started was around providing assurance, and that is still a part of our brand that is really important to us today. And therefore trust in our brand is really critical for us. But equally, we have grown as a brand and grown as an organisation and grown in terms of the service set that we offer to our clients. And we have stayed relevant, I think, to that changing client base. Even through to having organisations like ACNE join the Deloitte fold and become a Deloitte business. That you might think that ACNE is quite a distance from that kind of heritage brand of auditor and assurer, but actually bringing that creativity and that dynamism. Deloitte Digital as a sub brand of Deloitte is also a really important aspect of how we build our brand. All these things go together to build the picture of Deloitte and stay relevant to what our clients need us to be able to provide to them.
Probably a good place to try and wrap up this conversation, I think, Johan and Annabel. Thank you so much for coming on the show today to talk about this. It's a really interesting topic. I think probably more so in the context of 2020 and everything that's gone on this year. Brands are incredibly important, really. So I suppose for a final question, and maybe in a sentence, or might allow you to stretch to 2 sentences, but please could you answer this week's big question, which is, do we care more about a brand or what they stand for?
My perspective is that these things are becoming one and the same, and brands that ignore what they stand for, ignore the wider impact that they have, ignore their purpose, absolutely do so at their peril, and they will not survive.
Yeah, and I would say if you don't have a brand, you just have a name. And I think the only way to be successful in the future is to fill that name with a lot of emotions and things, and suddenly you have a brand. And that's the key to success.
Johan, Annabel, thank you so much for coming on the Green Room this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find all of our episodes on our webpage. Just go to deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please do comment, give the podcast 5 stars, tell your friends and family and pets about it. And if you've got any burning questions that you want us to answer, then do get in touch and we'll do our best.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.